Hey everybody, my name is Arda Ocal. I work at ESPN and I am a very passionate but continuously learning Star Wars fan.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Welcome to episode number 193 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars Fan Talkshow. I'm your host, Pete Fletzer, and along with my co-host, Nick Mielke, we bring you the conversations with the people behind the Star Wars fandom. Since 2019, we've had the great privilege of speaking to Oscar winners, New York Times best-selling authors, actors, celebrity superfans, and social media voices capturing that magic moment when Star Wars fans meet. Well, this episode falls into the category of celebrity superfan. We had the pleasure of sitting down with Arda Ocal. He's one of the hosts of the NHL on ESPN. He's a SportsCenter host, and he also hosts an ESPN podcast or two. In fact, just last week, ESPN announced that he signed a new multi-year deal with the sports network. So congratulations to our new Star Wars friend, Arda. He also happens to be a huge Star Wars fan. Recently, he dressed up as Grand Admiral Thrawn from the Ahsoka series. He did the blue skin, he did the red eyes, he did the whole thing, and he sat behind the SportsCenter desk and posted it up on social media. And he also brings a really unique perspective to his fandom because, as he talks about on this episode, his love of Star Wars grew as a result of the DisneyPlus era. We talked about that. We talked about pro wrestling and hockey, and we closed out by asking him which Star Wars fans are the biggest fans of some of our Earthbound sports. It was really a ton of fun. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you that we are a part of the SSW network, which means not only do we bring you around the galaxy, but you'll also find an occasional podcast, The Wills, in your podcast feed. Plus, we bring you the only live Friday night Star Wars talk show where we take your calls and we take your comments in the chat and we talk about it on our YouTube channel. The show is called Force Connect, and you can find it at youtube.com/@the-SSW network. Head on over there and subscribe now. You can also catch the replay here in the Around the Galaxy podcast feed. Also, if you'd like to support us by becoming a patron, you can join us for as little as $3 a month. If you do, not only will you get swag and early ad-free access to our shows, but you'll also get an exclusive link to be part of the live virtual audience when we record Around the Galaxy with our celebrity guests for episodes just like this one. So head on over to the SSWnetwork.com and click Join SSWN, or head over to patreon.com/the-SSW network. There are multiple tiers to choose from, all with their own special benefits. Please go on over there and check that out. Finally, make sure you follow us on all your favorite social media platforms at the SSW Network. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. You can even find us on TikTok. Yes, we do have the occasional strange TikTok video. Look, it's probably not a place we should be hanging out too much to begin with, but anyway, we're there. You can find us at the SSW Network. You can also follow this show on Twitter at ATGcast. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring you our interview with Arda Ocal of ESPN after these messages. We are talking to Arda Ocal from ESPN. Arda, how are you doing?
That was one of the greatest intros ever. That was awesome. Oh my gosh, I have found my home. I have found my people.
That's right.
Awesome.
You belong here with us.
Oh, this is great. You know, they say like surround yourself with people better than you so you can like absorb and learn. Like I do that with the Star Wars community. Like you just put out a roll call of incredible people. Like, by the way, I love the Star Wars video game. So like to see Deborah Wilson there, like Fallen Order, I'm about a quarter of the way through on Survivor. I know I'm a little behind there, but like, man, those games are terrific. I am so into them.
And awesome. she's like one of the greatest people in the world. Like we just she's been on actually the show twice just because she just loves talking Star Wars.
I love that.
And
and you've got a fellow Toronto resident in and Paul Sun-Young Lee
So
himself.
can I tell you an awesome story about him? How I met Paul Sun-Young Lee. Terrific dude, massive Blue Jays fan,
Yes.
big baseball guy.
Yes.
I used to be a weather reporter. This was like 10 years ago. And back then, this was before Paul had gotten into the Star Wars universe, and even before his show, Kim's Convenience, which started in Canada, blew up, and then got on Netflix.
So good.
Even before that was a TV show, it was a touring stage show. And that show had come to Vancouver, and I was doing morning weather reporting. And I just reached out to the production and I said, hey, I do this morning thing and I'm telling the weather, but sort of like a morning show. Can I have someone from the cast come? And Paul woke up at like 3 a.m. and stayed with me the entire morning. No complaints, just happy to be there. And like, we just struck up a friendship from there. And like, when I first saw, like, I had no idea that he got cast into Star Wars. I didn't have any of that inside information. And when I saw him on screen, I was like, this was jump out of my seat, like super happy joy for someone, you know, that was like one of the coolest moments for me personally watching Star Wars. I was so thrilled for him.
And that's one of the cool things actually that seems to be happening with Star Wars now is people who are getting involved just love it. Like they've been, because they've grown up with it, right? It's been around now for so long that the people that are making it, the people that are part of it, the people that are fans have been fans literally their entire life, which is a phenomenal segue for us to ask you, sort of give us maybe some of your earliest memories of Star Wars. How did you get into it? And because you are clearly a huge Star Wars fan, for people who don't know, because, you know, we are not, you know, we're a Star Wars podcast. So we're not all of us are sports fans. We are, Nick and I mean, we literally had a bet on the
absolutely.
Phillies and Braves, which, by the way, I still got to give you the charity that you got to donate to, Nick. Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
But
how'd that turn out for you, Pete?
Well, it turned out well until until we got to the next round. It's like being a Flyers fan.
Better than for me.
It's like being a Flyers fan. Things always start out great, and then they go straight in the can, my friend.
It was tough.
But all that being said, as an ESPN anchor, people may not be familiar with you, so maybe give us a little bit of your background, and then let's talk a little bit about your Star Wars story and how you got involved, or how you discovered it, and some of your earlier memories.
Yeah, so I grew up in Toronto, grew up loving sports, grew up loving movies, grew up loving pro wrestling, like just anything with a story, right? So that was my childhood, had a great childhood. Star Wars, I watched I was just like in between the original trilogy, early 80s. So I caught like Return of the Jedi in theaters, but I'll be honest, that was not the height of my Star Wars fandom. I watched the original trilogy. I watched the prequels, but I will completely say that like the height of my Star Wars fandom, where it's at its absolute top, is probably right now. And it jump started with The Mandalorian. It really did. Yeah. Like I was a casual to just above casual. Like I enjoyed being around Star Wars people. I loved going to Comic-Con and seeking out the Star Wars stuff. I was not the guy for a long time, though, that would try to read every book and every comic book and try to consume every single piece of Star Wars content. If there was new shows, if there was new, I would, check out. I wouldn't watch the Clone Wars religiously. I wouldn't watch Rebels religiously. I have since, but like not at the time. But when The Mandalorian came out, something just clicked in my head and I was like, this is my new favorite thing ever. And I just then went on a whole trail of, a path to consume as much of it as I can. And my fandom grew just month by month by month. I would not call myself, among the elite 1% of people in terms of Star Wars knowledge, but my desire to learn about it is absolutely there. So all those clips that you were showing, like Paul, for example, knowing something ridiculous about a helmet, right? Like, I want to learn more about that, even if I don't know at the moment off the top of my head, right? So like, that's where I'm at right now. And I love it. That's why I love doing shows like this, like being around, two guys that know so much about Star Wars and, talking about it's the best.
It's so cool to hear you say that, because we generally, as you saw with the guest list at the beginning, we're either talking to people who are creating content, whether it's authors or whatnot, or we do a lot of conversations with social media voices. And these are people who like, I always say, like, people are like, oh, you must know a lot of Star Wars trivia. I don't know as much as a lot of people. Like, I don't know the book stuff in depth, etc. But it's so interesting to hear you say that your Star Wars journey exploded with the Disney Plus era, because I feel like that's kind of a rarity, except for people like maybe like my kid who's like 11 years old and gotten into it that way.
Yeah, I listen, I understand that, but at the same time, I just thought it was such a beautifully done story. I'm a big fan of The Mandalorian. I honestly, I thought Andor was fantastic. I thought Ahsoka was really, really well done. Like, I'm really happy if there is a season 2. In fact, if it is greenlit, that like, I can't wait to see those stories. There's so many unanswered questions, especially in the last episode, right? So like, I'm loving what the majority of what is coming out of the new series. And yeah, that first season just really jump-started everything for me, which then made me go back and consume so much of the of what was already there, even the pre-Disney stuff, even the Legends stuff, you know, like I have a planet, by the way. Like, Arda is a planet close to Mandalore, which is the greatest thing ever.
Is it real? I didn't see. Okay, see, that's where my level of knowledge is.
Yeah. Apparently, like, there were 3 Ardas, and they were in Legends, but there's one board game that has been released in the canon era that qualifies as canon, and the Arda planet is mentioned on a map. It's on a map. It's it's very close to Mandalore. And so by virtue of that, and I'm going to take full credit for it, obviously.
Sure. Yeah,
I am officially, it's sort of like Stu John. Like, basically they have me in mind, right?
Yeah, you know, I have.
There you go. They were clearly thinking about you.
Yeah, clear, obviously.
Now I'm pissed because I did freelance work for Lucasfilm in the 90s. I've been a fan forever. There's no Planet Fletzer, damn it, and now I'm angry.
See, at some point I got to find a platform. Maybe it's our podcast at ESPN. Like, we got to bring you on and talk about that. Like, I want to hear those stories. Like, what it was like writing for Star Wars in the 90s. You know, like the Heir to the Empire era. Like, you know, like all the stories that you're doing. Yeah, we got to talk about that for sure.
Give me a call. I'm there.
Love it.
Well, one of the things that put you on our radar was you had the tweet up about if it got a certain amount of likes that you would host SportsCenter dressed as Thrawn. Of course, we immediately grabbed onto that. You talked about your love for, you know, this newer era of Star Wars, certainly with Ahsoka. What is it? You mentioned Legends a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about not necessarily having read all the books, all the comics, all the whatever, but what is it that's so compelling about Thrawn? Because I think we all feel that same way. And, you know, there's a good villain, maybe the best villain since, you know, the Emperor. Like, what is it about Ahsoka and maybe even Thrawn especially that kind of grabbed you and has sucked you in?
Thrawn is my favorite character in all of fiction, period. Any show, anything. Let alone Star Wars. All of fiction. I can't get enough of learning about Thrawn. And what I like about Thrawn is that in many ways, he's the opposite of Darth Vader, right? Like, Darth Vader is strong. He uses the Force. He's a powerful entity. He's got a very interesting, good, evil arc. Like, Grand Admiral Thrawn, especially through the Timothy Zahn trilogies, like, he had a very specific purpose, right? Like, he was worried about his people, the Chiss. He was worried about his home planet. And he had very specific plans in place to try and protect his people or ascend through, that whole idea. And actually, not to name drop or like, hey, whoa, look at me. I was able to do a TED Talk for the first time, like about a month ago. And Grand Admiral Thrawn was a giant part of it. Like 2/3 of the whole talk was about Grand Admiral Thrawn. And basically what I talked about was, it was the best. I was like, of course I'm going to incorporate Star Wars in some way into a freaking TED Talk, right?
Yes.
Like, it'd be amazing.
Give me a platform and watch me go.
That's it. All I wanted was a picture of me on the red carpet with Thrawn behind me, right? That's really what I wanted. So, like, the whole idea was I, in a way, like, this is going to sound weird because it's the villains, but like, I relate to Thrawn in the sense that he rose through the ranks of the Empire as like a non-human, as a Chiss, right? And like, the Empire is not a place that's kind to non-humans, right? Like, it's very difficult to survive in the Empire, let alone like rise to the rank of Grand Admiral and become the heir to the Empire. Like the whole idea that he had the wherewithal and the tenacity and the stick, like he had a different like desire and a need to survive in the Empire because he wanted to help his people. But the fact that he found a way to do it, and like the books go into detail about what he was going through when he was going through the academy, etc. Like I found all of that to be fascinating and very interesting because, and not to get too deep, I don't get too deep on this episode, but like I went through that coming up in the ranks in broadcasting, right? So I was like, man, this is awesome. And like the Thrawn we saw in Ahsoka, in many ways, like the motivations seemed a lot different than from the books, right? Like it seemed like something happened in those 10 years or however long it was since he went into hyperspace with the Purgles and Ezra, that like his motivations are all of a sudden very different. And it's like, I wonder what happened in those 10 years. I hope we get a trilogy book about it, you know?
Yeah. I think we will. And I think it's interesting too, because you always hear in the deep fandom, you end up with these conversations about people saying, oh, that wasn't like the character that I knew. But we're like in a spot in Star Wars storytelling where people aren't like, you're not the same person you were 10 years ago. You were not the same person you were 5 years ago. And most of us have changed as a result of COVID. So it really feels like there's a story out there. I agree with you 100% to see where he came from and where what happened to him, how he changed and why. And I love what you're saying about having a different motivation. And I think that's what makes him such an interesting character too, is that he's the bad guy, but he's got a different motive. He's got a relatable motivation, whatever that may be, whether it's for his people or for something that he's trying to reach. It makes for super compelling storytelling for sure.
And you got to wonder if that's still the case where we are in the timeline with Ahsoka, right? Like what has happened that maybe that's not the case anymore. Maybe he's like, the Chiss people abandoned me and now I'm on my own and the Empire is all I'm loyal to, or we don't know, right? Like there's still a lot of gaps to fill, which in itself is kind of exciting, right? The way I described him in the TED Talk was he's a bad boy straight out of Mensa. That's how I described him.
You mentioned video games before, and I was reading in your bio on the ESPN site that you are a dual record holder for, but it doesn't say what the record is. Is it the Sega version of NHL? I'm trying to.
Well, Pete and Nick, first of all, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't want to have to bring that up myself. Really appreciate you bringing up the fact that I am, yes, indeed, guilty. I am indeed a video game world record holder. Pause for applause. All right. It was for ridiculous. It was for NHL 95. The one NHL 94 is the big famous one, probably one of the greatest games, sports games ever. NHL 95, also a great game, the sequel to that. And we set the record for largest gap of victory for two players. So it was me and another guy. So we just basically, you pick the best team, you play against the worst team, and you run up the score as high as you can. And I forget what number it was, like 80-1 or something like that, something ridiculous. And so we submitted it to the authority, the video game authority that keeps records of these things. Yes, it exists. And they were like, yep, this is an official. We had a video. We recorded ourselves almost like a Twitch kind of thing before Twitch. And then we were like, yep, this tracks. We're good. And no King of Kong controversies here. Okay. There were no gaps in the videos. There were no VHS like splicing, none of that. Pure straight video. And it was accepted, and it still stands to this day. But I imagine that at some point someone will look at this and be like, this seems beatable. And then they'll just demolish it.
I'm waiting for the Netflix documentary of the trials and tribulations of Arda on his way to breaking that record and how it impacted your career. And you went on to become an NHL analyst and sports desk. At one point. That was it.
I love it. Yeah, there's two, actually. There's a second one. I think we did it with 4 people. We did the 2-person one first. We did that intentionally. And then one day I was at the NHL 94 championships. This is one of the things I did which was a lot of fun, by the way, hilarious. Like a cottage industry of like 30 something people that just come together on a vacation basically, but they're all really good at this game. And they all just compete against each other. And then afterwards, the after party isn't like, let's go out and paint the town red. It's no, let's play more NHL 94. and
doing what we were doing.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just do the exact same thing and have a rematch of the grand final. But also, you know what? Let's try and break this record today. And so we did that with 4 people instead of 2. It was just, all right, I guess we got another record now. Woo!
What year was that? Was it like around 95 when it was out, or was it like a sort of retrospective, like going back to the game? I'm sorry, I was a big fan of those Sega games. Like I played NHL 94 all the time.
Pete, that'll be our next podcast. We'll do a deep dive of NHL 94
Right.
and like how it got there. NHL. Quick side story. I know NHL 94 had low ratings. Like there were like accuracy 30, intelligence 23. Like there were like really low numbers that since you can't get that low anymore. And the reason was there were a lot of players that got offended and they were like, no, I don't like this at all. Why are you telling me that I have a 23 overall intelligence? Like, what is this nonsense? And so they had to essentially like make a floor for future games.
And they're like, well, Ulf, this is an Arby's.
Right. Excuse me, sir. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Pardon me, Ken.
There's a great, I just found this a couple months ago. There's a great long read article that's all about King Griffey Jr. baseball and the names of all the players, because the only player in that game is King Griffey Jr. Everything else is made up names. And it's this great long read article of the history of that game and where all those made up names came from. And it's that same kind of stuff that you're going, this is our childhood. And now we get to see how it was put together. And it's just fantastic.
Oh, yeah, we did. I have an NBA Jam behind me, and the story of that is incredible. Like these games have I agree with you. These games have like documentary potential in and around themselves. Like it's just incredible what they went through to put these games together. And like the amount of
stories behind the first Mortal Kombat.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. How the characters they chose and like the whole Jean-Claude Van Damme thing, the live action capture, like how they had Raiden like walking on a treadmill. Actually, there's a guy, Josh Sway, who created a whole documentary about it. He has like all of this raw footage from that game. He has like WrestleMania, the arcade game. He has NBA Jam, like all this like capture footage. It's fascinating to watch. He just throws them up on YouTube. It's awesome.
Well, and I want to shift gears just a little bit. We've talked about
about Star Wars in that video.
Yeah, we're going to bring it back to Star Wars just for a quick minute.
You know,
welcome to the
then we'll talk about that
video game
we'll
podcast.
Talk about more important things. That bass guitar in the background. We can go a lot of places.
Oh, let's go.
So talking about kind of your origins connecting with Star Wars, one of the things that I was interested in, and as I kind of did some research about who Arda was, you are an outspoken and dedicated member of the Islamic faith. And something that I think is very fascinating is George Lucas, when he started and built Star Wars, some of the key components of Star Wars were Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and the Jewish faith. Like those are all very strict, strongly interwoven throughout the core of Star Wars, its mythology, all that kind of stuff. So my question to you is, as a Muslim, how does Star Wars speak to you? Is there some ways that it connects and informs your faith? Because I find that really fascinating.
You definitely see some bits and pieces, and like you said, you see it in across all of the faiths. Picking, that happens a lot in storytelling, right? Like just the idea of borrowing from different inspirations to create a story. I mean, even Ahsoka, you look at the journey of Ahsoka in the latest season, it's essentially Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, right? Like in a way. Right. So like you definitely see those inspirations. And if certain faiths happen to inform or inspire, then great. Bring it into the story and make it, an interesting part of the story. At the end of the day, we just want cool stories to be told and be entertained, right? So if that's going to make it better, then absolutely, I'm all for it. Even just Andor, like the whole like prison sequence, right? Like just the power of that arc is incredible. Like in Andor, did they even mention the Force once? I don't think so. Like we definitely didn't like see, like it really felt, this is probably the most realistic Star Wars presentation we've ever had.
Yeah.
Right? And like I'll say this. people, especially because of the proximity of the release of both series, right? Andor versus Ahsoka. To me, like Andor opened our minds to how Star Wars can be presented in the future, like what different genres or styles we can look forward to. It like Andor still played within the Star Wars sandbox, but in many ways it was pushing the borders, right? In the way that it was presented. It felt very real in a way, like a lot of it felt the most realistic we've ever seen in any Star Wars. But then meanwhile, Ahsoka opened our minds to the locations, the types of stories that can be told, right? Like now we have an entire new galaxy to tell stories in. So it's almost like these two series in particular, like just expanded the possibilities to a large degree, which is awesome.
I talk about that a lot, about how probably one of the best things about the Disney acquisition was just the fact that there was so many different doorways for people to enter Star Wars. And you were already there, but you got really sucked in through Mandalorian. My sons, I say it all the time, my people who listen to the show probably are sick of hearing it, but my sons, Luke, Han, and Leia, are Rex, Fives, and Cody from Clone Wars. Like that's his thing. And if you take that, then you also look at, as you just said, I mean, Mandalorian is a different type of storytelling style than Ahsoka, than Andor, than the movies. Solo was, and you could definitely see the comedic elements that went into the original script to that. And so, and I think that's what's kind of cool about Star Wars and frustrating with the Star Wars fandom is like, if you don't like that one thing, there's another thing for you. It's, you don't have to love all, and that's it. You don't have to love all of it.
I will say this about the Star Wars fandom. I love the passion of Star Wars fans. I used to work at WWE. I was very connected in the pro wrestling bubble. Star Wars fans remind me a lot of pro wrestling fans. And let me describe pro wrestling fans, and then you tell me how close it is to Star Wars fans. And I want to be very clear here. I am not saying this in a negative way at all. Sure. I am just describing them for you in terms of how they consume their favorite product of choice, and also how they dissect their favorite product of choice. Pro wrestling fans love to prognosticate, and they love to be right. So if they're trying to predict what matches will happen at the next WrestleMania, even 7-8 months out, several months out, if they're right, they feel this sense of pride, right? Like, oh, I got this right. And they love to fantasy book, as they call it in pro wrestling. I'm going to fantasy book what's going to happen with this Roman Reigns championship title reign. When will it end? Who is it going to end against? Where will it end? How will it happen? They love to do that kind of forward thinking and predicting. They also have their favorites, and they grew like where they were the biggest fan, whether it was the rock and wrestling era of the 80s, the attitude era of the 90s, what they call the ruthless aggression era of the 2000s, or the current era of WWE or AEW or whatever you consume. Wherever you were your most passionate as a pro wrestling fan, that colors your how you view pro wrestling as it evolves. Yeah. So as new things become popular in pro wrestling, it's not that you take offense to it per se, but it's very much a paradigm shift that either you're not ready for or unwilling to take, because you have the memories of how you loved pro wrestling at one point in time. And so you always compare it to that.
100%. And that's absolutely the Star Wars fandom. And I went through that myself with, I've been completely transparent with people. When I first saw Phantom Menace, I was lucky that I was at the New York City premiere. Yeah. There were celebrities all over. It was a big event. And I walked out of it and I was like, I don't think I like that. And honestly, it took me quite a long time. It took me to the Disney era to sort of see all the connection to become a fan of it. But I think you're right. I think it's because there's just no way you capture that entry point love of it. Same thing with, I use music as an example all the time. Like, I was a huge Metallica fan in the 80s and the 90s, and I haven't loved the stuff too much since, but you know what? I love that there's other fans. I love that my kids are into newer Metallica, and I'm not, but at least we're both into Metallica. So it's a cool.
Pete, can I tell you that there was a story like a couple months ago that Metallica did a weekend? I believe it was SoFi Stadium, maybe SoFi, one of the stadiums in California. And they, in their weekend residency that weekend, outdrew or grossed Taylor Swift. And I have never been more proud in that moment. It was like the greatest thing ever. I was like, yeah, score one for the dads. Let's go.
We got one.
We did it. Way to go, James. Way to go, Lars. Yeah. I'm just so happy.
What we were talking
the Swifties are like, what's wrong with you? What is the matter with you?
Just give me a moment.
Yeah. Go back to covering Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce on SportsCenter. Okay, bud?
Oh man. It's my daughter had never heard of the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously, until a couple weeks ago. And now,
amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. Well, you touched on music, and Nick mentioned it also. I see a bass behind you. Nick and I happen to be bass players. I have had multiple people who play bass on the show. We have like Nick from Bayside. We have Adam from Story of the Year. We've had actors who it turns out, oh yeah, I play bass. You play bass. I'm guessing, unless you just collect
Star Wars and bass players.
But
amazing.
How long have you played bass? Give us a little bit of your bass story.
It was definitely a middle school, high school, college. That was my era of bass. Like I just picked it up, honestly, just to see if I want to replay it. Maybe I'm keeping it for my kids, honestly. But like the last thing I played on it was the NHL and ESPN theme song just for a social thing. But like I loved it. Yeah, I was a big fan of Flea. Like I always loved the bands that had a predominant bass player that didn't just follow the chords of the guitar, right? Like you can relate to that, right? Nick and Pete, like
absolutely.
Flea, Peanut from 311 was really good. Les Claypool, Primus, like when they were prominent, it was noticeable, right? One of the first riffs actually that hooked me really good was oh my god, what was that song by Space Hog? Oh my god. In
the meantime,
the first like do 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 do, and I was like, this sounds so cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Gee, what else do we have in common, guys? Like, I go down the list. like anything else?
It is funny though. There's like this weird bass player connection, and bass player, and of course, as you saw in the opener, we had Charlie Benante from Anthrax on, and there's just something. I think there's this weird sort of. If something about Star Wars catches you, you probably also have some sort of, not probably, you might have a musical connection, and I don't know what it is. I tried to get at it with Charlie, and he didn't know. I've spoken to Nick and Adam about it. I don't, but there's something about it. And there's something about bass players in Star Wars though that's really, I don't understand what that connection is.
It sounds like goaltenders and being great hockey analysts on television. Like goaltenders just do it really well for some reason. Maybe bass players, or if you ever played a bass in your life, you're gonna love Star Wars.
Yeah, maybe there's something about that. I don't know what it is.
The Venn diagram is large.
I'm like, I feel like, and every time I talk about it, I'm like, I'm really just trying to force something here. Maybe I just don't know what the problem is.
No, but at this point, we're like,
another one for us, right?
Yeah, at this point, we're like 12 or 14 people deep that we've interviewed on this show that are all bass players and Star Wars fans. So there's something there. The statistics are proving out at this point.
We're gonna have to have like an all weekend bass player Star Wars marathon or something. I don't know what that's gonna look like.
I'm in. I love it.
Well, we talked a little bit about we a big hockey fan here, but one of the things we want to throw a concept at you, and it's something a little bit different. Not all of our listeners are big sports fans, but as I said, we are. We want to throw a couple sports at you and get your perspective as a Star Wars fan. Which Star Wars character is going to be like the biggest fan of that sport? Like, for example, let me start by throwing like baseball. Which Star Wars character is like the big baseball nerd? Because to me, baseball is like the nerd sport, and I love that. But
the biggest baseball fan in the Star Wars galaxy, it's not Han. It would be too boring for Han.
Right,
it would be way too boring for Han. I feel like Hu Yang might like it because baseball is very very analytical. It can be very analytical, and it's like a collection of information and the type of equipment and like the details, the nuances. And Hu Yang knows like every lightsaber ever, right? So like
the history of baseball.
Yeah, and baseball has like such a rich history that it's almost as if there would be a droid that would be created at the very beginning of baseball that would just collect all the information. So Hu Yang would be a good choice. I wonder if. Yeah, I'm going to simmer on baseball for a second. I would go with Hu Yang for now.
Okay.
I like that.
That's a good one. Nick, you got one? You got a sport to throw at him?
Well, you jumped in right off the bat and you said it's not Han. And I kind of agree with you. Han's not a baseball guy.
He's probably a football guy.
Who's going to be the Star Wars? Who's the person in the Star Wars galaxy that's a huge NBA fan? They want that fast pace. They want that drama. They want it to be really good in the playoffs. The regular season, they're working their way through it. Who's your Star Wars NBA fan?
Yeah, Star Wars NBA fan. I feel like Ezra might be a sneaky NBA fan. I feel like Ezra would love he's just like because he's so he's got that jokiness to him a little bit, and like NBA personalities. I think that he would find that funny. I feel like an NBA player would throw in a I'm Jabba the Hutt reference just like as a nod to Ezra, So like, I feel like that might be a good one. Sabine might be actually. I could see Sabine and Ezra going to NBA games. I could see them at Celebrity Row and they're like there and like Ezra stands up and. Well, I guess it's Sabine's now, but Sabine will like just have the lightsaber in the air. It's like ha ha ha! Look at this, hey, cool, and then like throw it back in the holster, kind of thing.
Totally.
Yeah, I think those two would be a good choice.
That's a good one. They throw the kiss cam at him, and there's that awkward moment where we're waiting. We're waiting. Like, is it going to happen? I don't know.
And then Chopper comes in like right between them and like ruins the moment. Oh, Chopper.
Yeah.
and then it cuts away.
Stadium.
And then it just cuts away.
Love it.
Just as long as it's not Luke and Leia on the kiss cam.
Yeah. We've gone through this before. You can't do that.
Yeah, too soon, guys. Hashtag too soon.
So I was going to throw football at you, but I think you're right. I think Han's probably a football guy.
100% Han Solo, because he would want like the most popular sport, right? He would want like he probably loves the action. He's probably the guy that's hosting the party.
He's also betting heavily on football.
He's probably he's probably into that world. Like he just screams, I love the NFL. And he's probably the guy that like, one of the big celebrity, like he might do the celebrity coin toss at a game or something like that. Like I could see Han being that guy for sure. And like Chewbacca's just there because like his buddy's there and Chewbacca's not really understanding anything. And he's just like, like just happy to be there. Although we all make the jokes about how Chewbacca should be on the defensive line, and he would make a great goalie though. I think Chewbacca would just throw him in net in hockey. He'd be great.
Right.
In the modern hockey era with the 6'4" goalies, he's the guy, right? Well, we'll throw just one more at you. Who's the biggest hockey fan?
Yeah, who's the biggest hockey fan? That's a really good one. Luke could be a hockey fan. I could see Luke as a hockey fan. I don't know if he's the biggest hockey fan, but I could see him as a hockey fan. I think he would respect the team nature of it. I think that he would enjoy the action. Yeah, I think Luke is a good one. I feel like though, some of the villains would love hockey though. I wonder if like Darth Vader would like hockey. I feel like he would appreciate elements of hockey. Yeah. Like just the rough and tumble nature
all the gear.
Of it. Yeah.
I just need to, you said villain. I think I would say, and I haven't thought about this at all. I just put the questions together. I don't think of answers, but I would think maybe like Darth Maul might be like, just because of the intensity.
Yes.
And the,
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
yes. Actually, let me go back to football for a second.
Okay.
Thrawn would love football.
Oh my God.
Because football is like the most tactical sport, and it's like stop and start. I think Thrawn would love how he could like manipulate every play in the game, and every time it's an opportunity to outsmart the opponents. I think he would be all over that.
Right. Yeah.
Thrawn would give up a full set of downs to figure out what your defense is doing to turn around and smoke you the next time.
4 and out. We lost the day, but we have not lost the war just
we're
yet.
Not done here.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That holding penalty was completely worth it.
And I think if I can throw in my 2 cents on hockey, I'm going to go with Zeb for hockey because there's a lot of punching in hockey. Zeb loves nothing but a good, punch somebody with the helmet on. He'd be in for the brawling aspect of hockey.
I love that. I think 000 would be a big combat sports fan. I think 000 would be like watching championship boxing fights and UFC, like front row cage side.
100%.
In his in their retirement when they're questioning their existence because they're not out there murdering people or doing contract killing or whatever they're doing. They're like, what is the meaning of life? They're there watching UFC fights. They love it.
We got Black Chrysanthemum in Boba Fett, Book of Boba Fett. We got to get 000. And what's the R2 unit guy's name? I can't remember his name. We got to get those 2 murder droids in live action at some point. That'd be great. And I think the Stormtrooper on your shirt would probably be playing for the San Jose Sharks.
Probably at this point, he would be getting a big contract with the San Jose Sharks right now.
That's the only thing keeping me going this week is the fact that the Flyers play the Sharks this week. So there's a chance that we're not going to completely shit the bed this week.
Incredible. Hey, the Flyers have had a great start, by the way.
Much better than anybody expected. I said, I tweeted out at one point that when I watched the Flyers opener, it was like going back to watch your high school football team. You know the uniforms, but you don't know any of the names. And well, Arda, you've given us an hour of your time. I really appreciate it. This has been so much fun talking Star Wars with you. Where can people follow you, and where are they going to see you on ESPN?
You on X at Arda, Instagram Arda Ocal. Just follow me there. Honestly, the more Star Wars fans I can be friends with, the better. So I always am welcoming and happy whenever I get new follows from people who love Star Wars. And you just, if you're a hockey fan, you'll see me on the NHL and ESPN coverage. Thursday we have a doubleheader on ESPN Plus. So you see me on the desk between intermissions. And then we have a Star Wars podcast, Never Tell Me the Odds, that comes up every now and then. The feed is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's me and 2 other guys, Ryan McGee, Clinton Yates, who are also really great people at ESPN. We're like 3 different corners of ESPN. Like one is entrenched in college football. The other one is entrenched in Major League Baseball. And I'm entrenched in hockey. And we all come together to nerd out about Star Wars, which is the coolest thing ever. So, I appreciate the time, guys. Like, let's definitely do this again. This was a lot of fun. Really cool to nerd it up with you guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to Arda Ocal, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. If you'd like to become a member of our Patreon program to support the show, head on over to the sswnetwork.com and click Join SSWN. You'll also find information about previous shows, information about our hosts, as well as clicks to our merchandise and social media channels. Our show has been copyright 2023 Pete in the Seat Studios, and our music is brought to us by the band Apollo's Ghost. May the Force be with you.